There comes a moment when inspiration disappears, when the fire you relied on goes quiet, and you are left alone with your habits. In that silence, something decisive is revealed, because what carries you forward then is not desire, but the discipline quietly shaping who you become. When motivation fades, the mind does not become empty. It becomes honest. The noise falls away, and what remains is the pattern you have been rehearsing all along. This is where many feel an inner friction they cannot name, a tug between who they intend to be and who they have trained themselves to act as. The conflict feels uncomfortable because it is unseen. It happens beneath words, beneath effort, beneath excuses. Most people believe the struggle begins when circumstances turn against them. In truth, it begins long before, in the privacy of thought. The mind is always at work, conditioning itself through what it repeatedly entertains. When you are motivated, you do not notice this conditioning. Energy masks it. Emotion carries you. But when motivation fails, thought stands exposed, and habit takes command. This is the moment that defines direction, not the moment of excitement, but the moment of resistance, not the day you feel inspired, but the day you do not, and still must decide how you will think, because thought is never neutral. It is either disciplined or undisciplined, ordered or scattered, directed or drifting, and the mind left unattended always returns to what is familiar. Here is the quiet truth few confront. Your outer life is shaped less by your peak moments and more by your ordinary mental posture. The way you speak to yourself when no one is listening, the assumptions you allow to pass unchallenged, the small permissions you grant yourself to delay, to doubt, to avoid inner discomfort. These seem insignificant, but they are rehearsals. And rehearsals become reflex. When motivation disappears, you are not being punished. You are being shown your current level of inner training. Just as the body reveals its condition under strain, the mind reveals its condition under pressure. This is not failure. It is feedback, a mirror held up by life, asking you to see clearly without judgment. Many mistake discipline for force. They imagine it as something harsh, rigid, or joyless. But true discipline begins as awareness. Awareness of the thoughts you allow to settle and repeat. Awareness of the stories you silently tell yourself about effort, difficulty, and worth. Awareness of how quickly the mind seeks relief when effort is required. This awareness is not loud. It is calm. It watches without flinching. The unseen battle is not against the world. It is against unconsciousness, against the tendency to let thought wander wherever feeling pulls it. When motivation is present, this wandering seems harmless. When it is gone, the wandering becomes costly, because without direction, the mind defaults to what is easiest, not what is true. Every significant change begins here. In this recognition, you begin to notice that your results are not random, and neither are your reactions. They are the effect of causes planted long ago through repetition. Thoughts repeated without challenge sink deeper. They become expectations. Expectations become behavior. Behavior becomes character, and character, quietly and faithfully, shapes destiny. This is why waiting to feel ready is a subtle form of delay. Readiness is not a feeling. It is a condition of mind, a condition built through consistent self-command, especially when no emotional reward is present, especially when the mind argues for comfort, especially when no one is watching. When you understand this, you stop asking why you do not feel motivated, and you start observing what you think when you are not. You begin to see the patterns that have been governing you in silence, and in seeing them clearly, without self-criticism, you take the first step toward inner order. Because before success can appear in form, it must be established in thought, and before thought can be powerful, it must be disciplined. Not once, not occasionally, but as a way of being. This realization does not arrive with excitement. It arrives with calm recognition, a quiet knowing that the work ahead is inward, and that it has always been. Once awareness sharpens, you begin to notice how often the mind repeats itself, not loudly, but persistently. The same doubt stressed in different language, the same justifications returning with familiar comfort. These repetitions are not accidental. They are instructions being given to the deeper self day after day, shaping what feels natural and what feels difficult. The subconscious does not argue. It accepts. It does not weigh truth or falsehood. It responds to frequency. Whatever thought is most often entertained, whatever emotion is most often felt, is taken as a directive. Over time, it becomes a silent agreement. This is why change feels heavy at first. You are not only choosing differently, you are interrupting an old agreement. Most people believe their limits are imposed by circumstance. In reality, they are imposed by the thoughts that have been repeated so often they now feel like facts. The mind says, "This is just how I am. This is what effort costs. This is what I can expect." And because these statements are familiar, they feel convincing. Familiarity is mistaken for truth. Every time a thought is repeated without challenge, it deepens a groove. The mind travels that groove automatically, especially when tired, stressed, or unmotivated. This is why motivation feels unreliable. It does not address the groove. It only briefly decorates it. When the decoration fades, the groove remains, guiding behavior as it always has. You begin to see that discipline is not about forcing action. It is about choosing what you repeatedly tell yourself when action feels inconvenient. It is about the quiet refusal to rehearse thoughts that weaken resolve. This refusal is rarely dramatic. It happens in small moments. When you choose not to dwell on discouragement, when you redirect attention without argument, when you act without waiting for internal permission, the subconscious learns through repetition and emotion combined. A thought repeated casually has some effect. A thought repeated with feeling has much more. This is why moods matter. When you repeatedly associate effort with frustration, the mind learns to resist effort. When you repeatedly associate challenge with meaning, the mind learns to lean forward. These associations are formed slowly, but they are powerful. You are always programming yourself. The only question is whether it is deliberate or accidental. The words you silently use when you make a mistake, the tone you adopt toward yourself when progress is slow, the expectations you carry into the day before anything happens, these are not neutral. They are instructions being delivered inward. At first, this realization can feel unsettling. You see how much has been left to habit, how often thought has been allowed to wander into familiar weakness. But this is not a reason for guilt. It is a reason for precision. You cannot change what you do not notice, and now you are noticing. This is where patience becomes essential. The subconscious does not change its responses instantly. It responds to consistency. Just as it was trained through repetition over time, it must be retrained the same way. There is no shortcut here, and there is no need for one. Quiet persistence is more effective than bursts of intensity. When motivation fails, this persistence becomes visible. You continue the inner instruction even when there is no emotional reward. You repeat constructive thoughts not because they feel inspiring, but because you know they are formative. Over time, the mind begins to accept a new pattern. What once felt forced begins to feel familiar, and what feels familiar begins to feel natural. This is how inner resistance softens, not through argument, but through replacement. You do not fight old thoughts. You starve them by refusing repetition. You feed new ones through steady use. Gradually, the balance shifts. The mind begins to anticipate strength instead of avoidance. Effort becomes less dramatic. Action becomes quieter. You may notice that external circumstances have not yet changed. This is expected. Inner change always precedes outer evidence. The deeper mind must first accept a new normal. Only then does behavior follow without strain. Only then do results begin to align. In this stage, faith is not yet belief. It is willingness, willingness to continue the practice without proof, willingness to trust the law of cause and effect within. You are planting seeds you may not yet see. But you know the ground. You know how it responds to what is consistently placed there. And so you continue, not driven by emotion, but guided by understanding, knowing that repetition is shaping something deeper than mood, knowing that each disciplined thought is a quiet act of construction, knowing that you are becoming, moment by moment, what you consistently affirm inwardly. As repetition continues, something subtle begins to change. The mind no longer resists as sharply. There is a growing sense of familiarity with steadiness. This is the beginning of faith, not as hope, but as inner certainty forming quietly beneath awareness. Faith does not announce itself, it settles in. At first you may not trust it. You have been conditioned to associate faith with emotion, with uplift, with visible signs. But true faith is calm. It does not need reinforcement from circumstance. It is the settled conviction that what you are doing inwardly is aligned with an unchanging law, that what you impress upon the mind will, in its own time, express itself. This conviction grows from emotionalized thought, not from excitement, but from sincerity. When thought is repeated with meaning, when it is felt as true even in the absence of evidence, it carries weight. The subconscious responds to this weight. It accepts the instruction more deeply. Behavior begins to follow without inner debate. You notice this when action feels less dramatic. You do not need to convince yourself as often. The mind does not argue as loudly. There is a quiet agreement forming within. This is not blind optimism. It is recognition born of consistency. You have seen enough inner cause to trust the effect. Faith, in this sense, is not passive. It is active alignment. It is choosing to think in harmony with what you intend to become, regardless of present conditions. It is maintaining inner order when outer evidence lags behind. This requires emotional discipline, the ability to feel calm in uncertainty, to remain steady when results are delayed. Most abandon this stage, not because it is difficult, but because it is quiet. There is no immediate reward, no external validation. The old habits call back, offering familiar comfort. But something has shifted. You can feel the difference between comfort that weakens and effort that strengthens. As faith deepens, identity begins to change. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to be disciplined. You begin to see yourself as someone who is governed from within. This shift is subtle, but decisive. Behavior follows identity effortlessly. You do not force yourself to act in accordance with who you believe you are. You simply do. This is why belief is so powerful. It organizes behavior without strain. When you believe something deeply, you do not debate it. You act from it. The mind conserves energy by aligning action with belief. Inner conflict dissolves. Decision becomes simple. You begin to notice that emotions no longer dictate your direction. They pass through without commanding you. Motivation may still come and go, but it no longer holds authority. You are guided by something quieter and more reliable, an inner standard you do not negotiate with. This does not make life easier in appearance. Challenges still arise. Fatigue still appears. Doubt still visits. But none of these determine your course. They are recognized as temporary states, not instructions. You do not identify with them. You observe them and continue. There is a historical pattern here, seen in those who achieved enduring influence. Not through constant intensity, but through unwavering inner alignment. They trusted the unseen process. They understood that the mind, once ordered, becomes a powerful ally. That faith, once established, becomes a stabilizing force. At this stage, you no longer seek motivation. You see it as unnecessary. What you have cultivated is stronger, a settled expectation that effort applied consistently yields growth. That inner order produces outer stability. That self-command creates freedom. The mind begins to rest in this understanding. Anxiety decreases. Urgency softens. You are no longer chasing outcome. You are expressing a way of being. And this expression carries its own momentum. You realize that faith is not something you wait for. It is something you practice. Each disciplined thought, each calm response, each deliberate action reinforces it. Over time, it becomes the ground you stand on. Solid, unquestioned, reliable. And from this ground, a new quality of discipline emerges. Not rigid, but definitive. Not reactive, but directed. A discipline that does not depend on feeling, because it is anchored in identity. This is where inner authority begins to take shape. As inner authority strengthens, discipline takes on a different quality. It is no longer a struggle between impulse and restraint. It becomes an expression of self-command. You do what you have decided to do, not because it is easy, but because it is settled. The decision has already been made within. This definiteness is powerful because it removes negotiation. The mind no longer asks whether you feel like continuing. It knows the direction. Energy is conserved. Attention is focused. What once required effort now requires presence. You are simply aligned with your own instruction. Definiteness of purpose does not arrive through force. It emerges when conflicting desires are resolved inwardly. When you stop entertaining opposing thoughts, when you no longer feed both commitment and escape, the mind cannot serve two directions without strain. Once it is unified, action becomes clean. You may notice a new calm entering your days, not because demands have decreased, but because resistance has. You are no longer fighting yourself. The inner arguments have quieted. This calm is not passive. It is concentrated. It carries weight. Self-command reveals itself most clearly when circumstances challenge you unexpectedly, when plans are disrupted, when progress slows, when effort is not rewarded immediately. In these moments, you do not react. You respond. You do not abandon your standard. You adjust without losing direction. This is the difference between discipline imposed from the outside and discipline governed from within. External discipline requires constant reinforcement. Internal discipline is self-sustaining. It is rooted in identity. You act in alignment because deviation feels unnatural. As this self-command stabilizes, you begin to trust yourself. This trust is not confidence in outcomes, but confidence in response. You know that regardless of conditions, you will maintain inner order. You will think deliberately. You will act consistently. This trust removes fear. Fear thrives in unpredictability. When you cannot rely on your own mind, uncertainty feels threatening. But when you know how you will respond, uncertainty becomes manageable. You are no longer dependent on circumstance for stability. Stability comes from within. This inner authority changes how you relate to the world. You listen more. You react less. You are not easily pulled into emotional currents. You choose your focus. You protect your mental environment. You understand that what you allow into the mind becomes material for creation. You no longer seek approval for your discipline. You no longer explain your choices. The need for external validation fades because your standard is internal. You measure success by alignment, not applause, by consistency, not recognition. At this stage, effort becomes quiet. There is no drama in persistence. You simply continue, day after day, thought after thought, action after action. The accumulation is invisible at first, but it is precise. Nothing is wasted. Everything contributes. You may recall moments from the past when you relied on bursts of motivation, how quickly they faded, how inconsistent the results were. You now see why. Motivation is a visitor. Discipline is a resident. One cannot replace the other. As self-command deepens, the sense of struggle fades. You are not forcing yourself to become someone else. You are expressing who you have decided to be. This decision, once made and maintained, simplifies life. You begin to experience a quiet authority in your presence. Others may sense it without understanding it. It is not dominant. It is coherence. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions are aligned. This alignment is felt. And from this coherence, transformation completes itself. Not as a sudden event, but as a steady realization. You recognize that the discipline you once thought you needed was never about doing more. It was about thinking with order, feeling with restraint, acting with intention. The outer world will eventually reflect this inner arrangement. It cannot do otherwise. But even before it does, you are no longer waiting. You are grounded, directed, at ease within yourself. And this is the foundation upon which lasting success rests. There comes a point when the effort you once noticed fades into the background, not because the work is ended, but because it has been integrated. Discipline is no longer something you practice. It is something you are. The mind has accepted its pattern, and it now moves within it naturally. This is transformation. Not a change in circumstances first, but a shift in identity. You no longer think of yourself as someone overcoming resistance. Resistance has lost its authority. You are not battling old habits. They have been replaced. What once required vigilance now requires only presence. You feel a calm certainty settle in. Not excitement, not pride, just knowing. Knowing that your thoughts are aligned. Knowing that your responses are deliberate. Knowing that your direction is stable. This certainty does not depend on results. It exists before them. The world may still test you. It always does. But the tests feel different now. They no longer threaten your sense of self. They are simply conditions requiring response. You meet them without inner disturbance. You adapt without losing form. At this level, success is no longer pursued. It is expressed. Outer achievements become effects, not objectives. You no longer chase outcomes to feel whole. You act from wholeness, and outcomes follow in their proper time. You recognize a timeless law at work. What is consistently impressed upon the mind must eventually express itself in form. There is no exception. Delay does not mean denial. It means development. The seed grows in silence before it breaks the surface. You also recognize that self-mastery is not control in the rigid sense. It is harmony. The alignment of thought, feeling, and action toward a chosen direction. When this harmony exists, effort becomes efficient. Life simplifies. There is no need to speak loudly about this. There is no need to convince anyone. The presence of inner order is felt more than declared. It carries a quiet authority that does not seek attention. You may look back and realize that motivation was never the key. It was always unreliable. What mattered was the discipline of thought when motivation failed. The decision to remain inwardly aligned when feeling offered no support. That decision changed everything. This is not a finish line. It is a state, a way of being that continues to refine itself. There will always be deeper clarity, greater subtlety, more precision. But the foundation is set. You are no longer subject to every passing impulse. The mind now serves you. It works with you, not against you. It amplifies your intention instead of questioning it. This is mental mastery, not domination, but cooperation. A partnership formed through consistency. And in this cooperation, life responds. Opportunities align, effort yields return, not because of luck, but because cause has been set in order. Inner order always precedes outer success, always. You rest in this understanding. Calm, grounded, certain, knowing that what you think consistently becomes what you live. Knowing that faith, once cultivated, sustains itself. Knowing that self-mastery determines destiny. This is the law that was always present, waiting to be recognized.